I'm so excited to introduce my next guest. Priyanka Jain is the founder and CEO of Evvy, and her mission is to close the gender gap in healthcare by way of the vaginal microbiome. She is a brilliant Stanford-trained scientist and businesswoman who's raised over $20 million to provide highly sophisticated genomic sequencing so we can understand what's going on when we do have a UTI, BV, a yeast infection, or all three concurrently. She is an incredible woman, and I'm so excited about this conversation. Here is Priyanka Jain. I want to start with your mission, which I love so much.
Thank you.
Because to end the gender gap in healthcare is huge. But then to start by way of the vaginal microbiome is beautiful.
I love that. I don't usually hear that.
I love it. When I read that, I was like, yes, please, to Priyanka Jain, yes. And I'd already seen what Evvy does, which is phenomenal. We'll get into that, of course. But I just want to talk about that mission for a second because huge and beautiful. Can you just tell me, yes, on the gender gap in healthcare, which is enormous,
yes,
but tell me what the vaginal microbiome has to do with it.
Yes, amazing. Okay, well, I am going to spend 1 second on the gender health gap because
Please
I do
do
think that the facts are shocking enough that they are worth being repeated.
They are.
I mean, and even just to make it slightly more specific, I think there's so many parts of the gender health gap, right?
Yeah.
There's access to the care, there's the experience of getting care and the way that women are dismissed at the doctor's office,
Yeah.
You name it. But I think more specifically what's so interesting is the gender data gap in healthcare. And what I mean by that is the fact that one, and this is the fact that really made me quit my job, was when I always joke, I was a patient of the healthcare system one too many times. And I remember doing my own research, as I think so many women end up doing when they don't get answers from the healthcare system. And that was when I found out that women were not required or even allowed to be in clinical research in the United States until 1993. And I was like, oh, my entire life makes sense now.
Yes.
Like, no shit, we don't know. Sorry. No shit, we don't know.
You can say anything you want here.
Anything about what's going on in my body. We've literally never studied women, right? We essentially only ever studied middle-aged, mid-sized white men. We defined what was predictive of health and disease, what the quote-unquote normal ranges were. Then we just like made everything smaller and we were like, now we have women's healthcare. Obviously, that's represented in today's experience of healthcare in the fact that, you know, women are on average diagnosed 4 years later than men across over 770 diseases, right? We just have so little understanding of what health and disease manifest as when the person that we're talking about has a female body. And I think especially important to talk about today in the age of AI and precision medicine, when what are any of those things except for the data that they're trained on, right? And well, it turns out that even the fields that we track in the EHR were defined by whatever was predictive of health and disease in a man. And I think there's such a big gap, but also opportunity in thinking about what are the unique signals that the female body is giving off all the time. I always joke, our bodies are probably constantly saying, I'm doing great over here, and like, I really need help over here. And then it's like we go to the doctor and the only thing we're asked is, when was your last period? As if that's like the only...
That is the only marker for your health.
It's like, you're dying. True. When was your last period? You have a headache. When was your last period? And so we became so curious about, okay, what are those other signals that the female body is trying to tell us about things that are going right and wrong, but we're just not measuring them because we never studied women. And that was kind of the genesis of Evvy. And obviously our first focus, as you mentioned earlier, is on the vaginal microbiome, which is a perfect example of everything I just described, and I will explain why. There's kind of two main things to know about the vaginal microbiome. One is that in the US, vaginal discomfort is the leading reason that women seek healthcare advice. Meaning the number one type of OBGYN appointment, 30% of women at any given time have at least one vaginal infection. So extremely, extremely prevalent problem.
Wait, 30% of women at all times are having some kind of vaginal infection.
Yes. Just one of them.
It does pretty much make sense.
Right. You're like, oh, that makes sense.
And you can have, you know,
co-infections. Yes. A lot of the time people are having co-infections. But I think this kind of goes, I'll get to this. The microbiome is more complicated than infection or not. But so in the clinical standpoint today, it is one of the most common appointments that exists in the healthcare system, right? And unfortunately, when we go to the doctor, we are more likely to be misdiagnosed than correctly diagnosed by a doctor. And we are more likely not to get better than we are to get better. So we are more likely to have the infection come back in 3 to 6 months than we are to actually get better. So you basically look at this and you're like, okay, this is one of the most prevalent and poorly managed conditions in the healthcare system. It's obviously so stigmatized, so taboo, so we don't even realize that all of these things are happening.
Absolutely.
And because of that, we have women who are then, searching, like, what do I do? They're on the internet. There's all these online communities dedicated to these issues. And unfortunately, we're then getting hit with another ad for a wipe, wash, suppository, something to make your vagina smell like a flower because the healthcare system has failed you, right?
Oh my God. How true is that? It's so true. And we've all been there.
Completely.
We've all been to that point where we're like, what do I do about this UTI?
Right.
I just had it. I was just on antibiotics.
Right.
Why is it back? Or whatever.
Right. Why does it hurt when I have sex? Why do I feel vaginal dryness? Why am I in discomfort before, during, after my period? And unfortunately, that is the current state of things. And I think, it's in the numbers. It's the fact that these companies are massive, massive companies because people need solutions that they're not getting from the healthcare system.
Yeah, not at all.
Right. So that's one side of the vaginal health and the vaginal microbiome. And then the other side is sitting in research land, and I think you'll appreciate this. There is so much research showing that the vaginal microbiome is not only obviously the cause of vaginal discomfort, vaginal infections, et cetera, and just to give us a little 101 here, essentially the vaginal microbiome, fancy word for just community of bacteria, fungi, viruses, microbes that live inside your vagina.
Right.
And it turns out we've essentially evolved with this community of microbes to play this very interesting role in our overall health.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is that when your vaginal microbiome is in what would be referred to as a healthy or protective state, what that means is that it's dominated by types of bacteria like lactobacilli. Maybe you've heard of that on yogurt or probiotics. And what lactobacilli do in the vaginal microbiome is produce lactic acid, hydrogen peroxide, and they take up space on the vaginal wall. And what that essentially does is it means that your vagina is essentially this open gateway, right?
Yeah.
Between the outside world, which has every pathogen, and then your most important reproductive organs. And what you find is that because of those protective bacteria, when pathogens get into the vagina, they just can't survive. It's too acidic, there's no place for them. And so the vaginal microbiome actually keeps them out. And what happens is when the vaginal microbiome breaks down, like God forbid, you have sex with someone new, you sit in your swimsuit for too long, all of those things, the pH starts to rise, those pathogens are able to replicate, able to make a home for themselves. And that's when we go to the doctor. We're like, oh, I feel discomfort, odor, itchiness, whatever it is. But what we're not paying attention to is the fact that we've also now lost that barrier, right?
Right.
And what you find is that not only are you having these infections, but research is starting to show you have huge differences in outcomes across fertility, IVF success rates, preterm birth rates, cervical cancer progression rates, STI acquisition, et cetera.
Right.
And I was like, how is it possible that there is this incredibly important set of biometric information that is frankly so accessible compared to every other type of sample that we take? And it could not only help us understand the number one reason women go to the doctor, but then also help us prevent so many downstream health implications.
Right.
And yet there is no data. There are no tools, services, access to information. And in the age of,
Amazing.
COVID and all these at-home tests and all these sequencing companies, 23andMe, Ancestry, gut microbiome companies, everyone's made this accessible except for in the vaginal microbiome, where it felt like there's a very obvious gap to give women and people with vaginas access to information on their own bodies and actually do the research that hasn't been done before.
Well, absolutely. And like you said, it's the most prevalent reason that we're seeking healthcare.
How crazy.
And it's, when you think about it, it's not crazy.
Right.
Because when something is off and wrong, and is it a yeast infection, is it a UTI, is it BV, we don't know. We are going to the internet. It is so stigmatized. And it's almost like, where do you go?
Completely.
Right? Because if you go to your regular doctor, they may not be able to see you.
Completely.
Also, your gynecologist may not be able to see you, because the way it's set up right now is you see them once a year.
Completely.
And so then you find yourself at urgent care.
Yeah.
Most of the time. And I can imagine they're not doing the same swab, but I would love to know what is different about what the doctor does, whether it's urgent care or your doctor or your OBGYN, than what you do. What are they doing that
Totally.
comes back with this data, and what are you doing that comes back? How is that different?
Yeah, such a good question. Well, I'll start by saying that, first of all, this is not doctors' fault. They don't have, it's not like doctors are sitting on all these amazing tools and services and they're not using them.
Yeah.
The problem is that there has not been enough innovation to give doctors the tools that they need to provide women and people with vaginas with the care that they deserve. So I'll start there.
Okay, start there, but then I'm going to put a pin in this really quickly, because I just realized that we've got to like back up about 5 steps and go, okay, wait a second, what is Evvy? And you are the founder and CEO of Evvy. Okay, let's go there. Let's go there. I've of course been, reading about it and love what you do. And really, like I said, with that mission, it's really unbelievable. But let's just talk about really quickly before we get into what's the difference between your doctor and what you do, and what is Evvy?
Yeah. Very fair question. So Evvy, I've alluded to this a little bit. Our focus is on overlooked female biomarkers. So understanding how can we discover and leverage overlooked data sets that the female body is trying to tell us that we are not paying attention to, and leverage those to improve our outcomes, both kind of acute ones and then also preventative long-term. Obviously, our first focus is on the vaginal microbiome. And today what we do is we offer precision, personalized, at-home vaginal healthcare.
And that means that I, as a consumer, as a woman, can go Evvy.com.
Yes.
And then follow the directions, and what happens? You send me a kit?
Great question. So what we are able to do, everything starts with our at-home vaginal health test. I always joke, it's easier than using a tampon. It's a Q-tip swab of your vagina. You put it in the mail, send it back to our lab. We do something called whole-genome metagenomic sequencing. Fancy terms for basically saying we sequence the entire genome of everything that's in your vaginal microbiome.
Wow.
So think what 23andMe or Ancestry did for the human genome. We're bringing that technology to the vaginal microbiome.
Okay.
And we're able to then educate patients on everything going on in their vaginal microbiome, how it's related to their symptoms, and really give people, frankly, the sex ed on this very important part of their body.
Just with one swab?
Yeah. One swab.
Amazing.
And we can also look for STIs, antibiotic resistance, every bacteria and fungi that's present. We are able to screen for over 700 microbes, every single one that's ever been isolated from the urogenital tract. What's going on in your vaginal microbiome? How is that related to your PCOS, your endometriosis diagnosis?
Great, okay.
How is that related to the symptom that you have, or your menopause diagnosis, or whatever it is, to help you really understand like what is actually going on, which is like, unfortunately, information that we've never had before.
No.
And then, most importantly, we are able to then say, okay, here's a concrete list of next steps. So here's some stuff you should talk to your doctor about. Here are the specific studies on the specific things that we found in your vaginal microbiome and what research has shown to be helpful.
Okay.
And then, if you don't have a doctor, your doctor can't see you for a few months, your doctor doesn't believe you, whatever it is, we are also able to match patients to providers through the Evvy platform who then prescribe custom compounded vaginal suppositories with the ingredients that we predict are most likely to improve your vaginal microbiome.
How interesting. Okay, so my options would be, after I send this swab back in, and then it takes, what, like a week to get my results back?
7 to 10 days,
Then does somebody contact me and say, hey, we've got your results. Your results are in.
Yep.
Now, do they give me a choice? Would you like to see these and take them to your doctor? Or would you like now an appointment with one of ours?
Yeah, basically. You get your results. It's this beautiful, in my opinion, I'm biased, beautiful educational experience, introduces you to your vaginal microbiome, explains all of the results. You're able to dive in, click around, click on studies, learn more. We give you the plan, and then we offer for every single test a one-on-one health coaching appointment. So a certified health coach who also has been trained in the vaginal microbiome to just answer all the questions. Like, what does this mean? What do I do about this? How do I talk to my partner about using a condom? Or how do I talk to my doctor about this? What is the language I should use? Explain the study to me.
This doctor will have that conversation with me?
This is our certified health coaches that provide this one-on-one service, and then they can help you understand, do you want to go to your own doctor? Do you want to see an Evvy doctor, answer questions about that?
So that's part of whatever I'm paying for
with the
to
test.
do this. What does it cost about?
Between $100 and $130.
Okay, but with either one of those choices, do I get this coaching scenario? Okay, that in of itself is pretty amazing.
Yes.
I didn't realize it was that in-depth, that you could have this kind of a conversation and actually look at your results.
Because which is critical.
It's critical.
Completely
It's critical. We understand. The way you're explaining it makes me really want to do it.
I mean, we must get you a test.
We must get me a test because with the way you're explaining, you're kind of, you click around, you understand. I'm a big proponent for you're your biggest healthcare provider, right?
Yes.
So the more we know, the better we can advocate for ourselves, and frankly, the better we can advocate for each other, right?
Completely.
Whether it's your daughter, your friend, your sister, your mother,
right.
whomever it is. So this is great, the fact that they can then walk you through,
yes.
oh, this is the protective thing, here's what's going on over here.
Yes. And, even because we always say, there's a lot of stuff to still figure out about the vaginal microbiome.
Sure.
And I will never forget when I was first launching Evvy and a journalist said to me, well, aren't you going to make women hysterical by giving them this information and they're not going to know what to do with it? Science hasn't answered all these questions. This was a very legit reporter. And I was like, no, I always say, treat women like they're smart. Give them the access to the information, link them to the studies, and say, you know what, this is super novel. There's only been one study on this. We don't really know.
Yeah.
And this is super well established. And then just be transparent. Explain it like it is. And exactly like you said, we always say, you are the expert on your own body.
Yeah.
If you don't feel right, we will give you the tools to help figure out what might be causing that, even if we haven't there hasn't been a massive randomized controlled trial yet.
Right.
We can help you understand N of 1, what might be happening for you. And what we find is that by providing all of this information, the health coaching in advance, that when patients go to the doctor's office, they are so prepared that they can actually participate in shared decision making.
Absolutely.
Right? Versus if you go to the doctor's office and you're trying to ask all the questions and the system is not set up for them to have the time for them, first of all, to understand all of this data,
Correct.
to explain it to you, and then to come up with a plan. And if we can do that in advance, you can use that 10 to 15 minutes to say, I know these are my options. Can we talk about the pros and cons in the context of my health goals?
Absolutely.
And that's what we really try to do, is we do all of the work up front so that when you are in that appointment making the decisions, you can actually participate in that.
That's amazing. That is really amazing. I love that. So you really do have options when you come out of it.
Completely.
Okay. And then just to go into the suppository. So if I say, you know what? Yeah, I do. I want to now kind of take that step.
Yeah.
I'm dealing with, issue A, B, and C, right?
Yep.
And so how does that work then?
Absolutely. So if you choose to get care through Evvy,
Yeah.
you would fill out a clinical intake. So
Okay.
same as you would at your doctor's
Yeah.
appointment. These are the symptoms I'm having. These are the medications I'm on. These are the things that I've had adverse reactions to, or I don't like. And actually asynchronously, a doctor will review all of your health intake, will be able to message you if they have any questions. And then based on the Evvy data, they'll actually go in and create a personalized plan for you and say, okay, we know that you have biofilms present, which might be affecting the ability for the antibiotics to be effective. So let's talk about handling that. Let's talk about which antibiotic is most suited for the specific microbes that we found here. And then most importantly, let's talk about rebuilding that protective bacteria that I mentioned earlier, because that's what's actually going to prevent you from having this infection come back. So what are the specific probiotics that you need that we can actually prescribe vaginally that could have the supplements that actually feed those bacteria so they're likely to survive?
Right.
And this, frankly, is not a 2-day process, right? Like, we're going to hold your hand through shifting the microbiome. And what's so amazing is that the vast majority of our patients retest every 3 months. So you have this constant feedback loop of what's working for me, what's not working for me. This partner, after having sex with a new partner, this happened to me, and now I need to take this step. And what we see is that we're able to get patients to a place where they're catching any type of imbalances before they become a full-blown infection. You've lost all of the good bacteria. And because of that, we're able to avoid the cycle of antibiotic after antibiotic, which is
absolutely, which is what happens to so many of us with, I think, most of the issues.
Completely.
Whether it's a yeast infection or a UTI or BV.
Yep. AV, CV, the list goes on. Yes,
right? I mean, those ones I think are very prevalent, but there's others.
Yes. BV is actually the most common vaginal infection, which I think we often don't talk about. My hypothesis is that there's so much shame around BV that people don't even realize BV is actually the one that 30% of women have at any given time.
Really?
Yes. And I think that as a society, we talk about yeast infections, we talk about UTIs, but there's something about BV and odor that makes people not want to talk about it, even though it is the most common form of vaginitis.
So let's talk about it.
Yes.
Let's get in there. BV, we have done you a disservice by not talking about you. It is your moment to shine. Let's bring it out on the stage. So, what is it? We know it's bacterial vaginosis. We know it's associated with odor.
Yep.
And itching too?
Depends on, it could be better studied. Yes. Itching is not a typical symptom of BV, but there are other things that might be going on that can cause itching while you also have BV, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Which is thrilling.
It's thrilling. So very exciting.
But BV is essentially, you know how I was describing before, when your vaginal microbiome is dominated by those protective microbes, et cetera.
Yeah.
Essentially, when it is not dominated by those protective microbes, when you have a diversity of bacteria, that is BV. So it is this very, very broad diagnosis for everything that is what we would call dysbiosis in the microbiome world.
Okay.
And that is part of the problem, in my opinion, right? Because we consider it as this incredibly broad diagnosis, it's then impossible to actually treat it. Because one of my mentors said so well that in the cancer space, for example, there was cancer which was unsolvable. Then you had lung cancer, still unsolvable.
Yeah.
Then you had, this specific mutation of this specific gene, and that became a solvable problem. And I think so many things in women's health are at the cancer and lung cancer level because we don't actually have comprehensive enough data to stratify what's actually going on for that patient.
That's
the value of the test, essentially, is being able to say it's not just BV dysbiosis. It's actually this much of this bacteria. This is the type of, enzymes that it creates. This is how we're going to fight it. This is how we need to reintroduce good bacteria, because the microbiome is complicated. We can't just assume all forms of dysbiosis are going to be solved with the same silver bullet.
Really interesting. And so then, when we're talking to this health coach and let's say they find, okay, we've got these strains of essentially what we don't want, right? We want that protective, the protective layer of the lacto, but we don't necessarily want staph. Right. So, or the others that I kind of, when you described that, I was kind of thinking like, it's like a party. It's like they're uninvited guests.
Yes.
They've kicked out the homeowners and they're like, woo, we are doing whatever we want.
Wow,
we are wrecking the house. Do you know what I mean?
Here's the thing. The vaginal microbiome, there can be a few strays. There can be a few crashers of the party.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
That's okay.
But once they kick out the homeowners, then it becomes a problem. And
then that's what happens though when we get on antibiotics, is that all of the protective layer, the homeowners get kicked out.
And then we're just hoping that the first people back in the house are the homeowners.
Which
is not always true. And in fact, most of the time, it's not.
It's not. And we have no instructions after we finish those antibiotics of how to get the homeowners back in. Let's get that protective layer back. There's generally no course of action for that.
Which, frankly, is because we haven't done enough work on figuring out what are the right strains, how do we reintroduce them, and there are many companies right now working on therapeutics that are vaginal probiotic therapeutics, which I'm very excited about. But I mean, I've talked to many of these companies and it's been hard to raise money. It's been hard to get them through the trials. And I think also we probably want a nuanced approach of, for different patients, we want different types of treatments. And I think that we just need to get to a moment where we actually have personalized precision medicine in women's health. And I think that starts by really understanding the specific problem for a specific patient and having real data, which we just never have in women's health. We don't.
And so the other beauty of what you're doing is that you are gathering all of this data.
Yes.
And then we know, oh my gosh, now we can actually study things. Now we can actually start to really close that gender gap in healthcare because we can do things with that data.
Exactly. And so when someone signs up to be a patient, the first thing that we ask them is, do you want to be a part of research or not?
Yes, so my answer is always yes, because I don't understand anybody who would say no.
Well, what you find actually is that women are very much like, I don't want my friend to deal with this. I don't want my daughter to deal with this. We get emails from so many women all day saying, what else can I tell you so that no one has to deal with this again?
Exactly.
And actually 97% of our patients consent into research because they are
please
help us solve this problem.
I was going to ask, how many people are saying no to that?
Right. Not many. But I mean, of course, I respect it. If someone doesn't want their data to be used in that way, I 100% respect it, and of course that's an option.
Okay.
But for patients who do consent into research, we're then able to say, oh, interesting, we start to see certain microbes cluster around women who are in menopause, or we start to see certain symptoms or certain genetic expressions that are slightly different from someone who's postpartum or someone who's on a certain birth control. And then we can start to say, oh, actually, all of those factors are playing a role in the vaginal environment.
Right.
And so then how can we design much more personalized care for that much more precise stratification of disease?
I love that so much. It makes so much sense. It really, really does. Otherwise, I mean, it really is this incredibly blanket approach to something that maybe could be, very small, and we're bringing in a giant tarp instead of, oh, here's this beautiful
specific, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, which reminds me that we must get back to your question of what happens at the doctor's office today.
Yeah, I haven't forgotten. Yeah.
You're not ready for what I'm about to tell you. Okay.
Hold on.
Everyone hold your seats. So today, the gold standard way to diagnose vaginal discomfort, vaginitis, vaginosis, whatever you want to call it, is something called the AMSL criteria. The AMSL criteria is a 4-point test. Test is a strong word in my opinion, in which first they ask you about your symptoms. And fun fact, up to 80% of women who have vaginal dysbiosis, so they are not dominated by that healthy bacteria, do not have symptoms. And so today we miss all of those people.
Okay.
Then 2 is we take a swab and we look at it under the microscope and try to look at the shapes to guess what the shapes that we see under the microscope could be in bacteria.
Okay.
3 is that we look at the vaginal pH, which is a very, very crude metric. Semen changes the vaginal pH. Your menstrual blood changes the vaginal pH. The material of your underwear, very crude metric. And then last but not least is the whiff test, in which we smell the swab to see if it smells. And if 3 of those 4 things are true, we give you an antibiotic.
No, I wasn't ready. Okay, you were right. I was not ready. And when you said whiff test, my heart went like, please no. Please don't make it like what? Please please be there.
Anything
please be another meaning for whiff. I'm like, oh my God, dictionary.com, let there be another meaning for whiff. Oh, wow.
Okay, but I will say there has been step forward innovation before Evvy. There have been PCR tests that will say, okay, there are 3 to 5 common pathogens. Let's do a PCR test to see if any of them are present.
Yeah.
And so many doctors now will order a PCR test. But I think, unfortunately, the reality is that people are still being misdiagnosed, underdiagnosed, you name it.
Yeah.
Because just exactly the house party analogy, just because there is an unwanted guest at the house party doesn't mean that they've thrown out the homeowners, right?
Exactly.
And oftentimes those things are present, but they're not a problem. Or they're not present and it's actually a different microbe than one of the 3 to 5 that you looked for.
Right.
And so there are some tests that are being done. They're just not comprehensive enough to actually help people understand the problem. And then at the end of the day, we're just doing the same thing. We're still just giving people an antibiotic. And so we're just bringing what's called next-gen sequencing to actually look much more comprehensively at what's going on so that we can come up with a much more targeted solution.
All right, so let's talk about those targeted solutions a little bit. If right now we're just prescribing antibiotics, and by the way, I mean, on those, not to go fully into that rabbit hole, but we could be completely resistant to antibiotic A, and antibiotic B might not even be introduced as an option.
Completely.
Which is, to me, crazy.
Yep.
So if it's not an antibiotic, can you give an example of what it might be?
Totally. And antibiotics sometimes are the thing that your patient needs, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so definitely when that is right, of course, that is what a doctor will choose to do.
For sure.
But it's not always right. And there's also things around antibiotics that can be really helpful, right? And I'll give you some specific examples. So one, we do in our test actually look for antibiotic resistance genes so that we are not doing what you said, which is prescribing an antibiotic that is not going to work.
Yeah.
So first it's saying, there's so many parts of this, but basically you can think about it in a few phases. One is how do you fight the disruptive bacteria, right?
Okay.
And there might be different pieces of that, which are an antibiotic, an antifungal, but then also, as I mentioned earlier, thinking about something called biofilms. I don't know if you're familiar with that term.
I want you to I am a bit, but I would like you to just kind of give the biofilms 101.
Great. The TLDR is just think about it like a spider web that your microbes, the pathogenic microbes, are building on top of themselves to make it hard for anything to get at them, right? Okay. So if you take an antibiotic, they might not even be getting to the bad bacteria because they've built their own house in your house, right? So even though the cops came, no one saw them, right? They were hiding. And so this analogy is going pretty far.
I like it though, because it gives you a mental image and you're like, oh, I get it.
Yeah, it's a really good analogy. So they're hiding and nobody's seeing them. And so the first thing we think about is, do you even have biofilm producing bacteria present? Do you have a history of recurrent infections? Because then we might want to think about biofilm disruptors, things like boric acid or other treatments that are specifically designed to help fight biofilms. Then we'll think about, again, which antibiotic, if necessary, is you're not resistant to and actually targets the pathogens that you have present. the other thing we can take into account there is certain antibiotics have a bigger effect on lactobacilli than others, which is relevant if you have lactobacilli, not relevant if you don't. So again, we can look at, okay, if you're 95% lactobacilli, maybe we don't want to affect those, right? But if you're 1% lactobacilli, maybe we can take a different approach.
Interesting.
So there's the fighting the bad, then there's rebuilding the good.
Yeah.
And that includes, like I said, probiotics, supplements, and then thinking about the role of estrogen, right? For example, in menopause, one of the primary reasons for vaginal discomfort is obviously estrogen plays a huge role in vaginal health, both in terms of the cell walls, atrophy, all of that. But it also turns out that estrogen produces glycogen, which is the main food source for lactobacilli. So when you have less estrogen, you start to see
food.
Yes. And so you have to think about, okay, if I'm going to
the good party's over. Exactly. There's no more good snacks.
No more the good drinks are gone. The snacks are gone. Exactly.
Oh my God.
Thinking about how do you repopulate the good guys has to also take into account the birth control, menopause status, postpartum status, you know, all of the things that could be contributing
absolutely
to that vaginal environment.
Okay. I just want to say, I can't wait to do this test.
I can't wait to give it to you.
I am so excited to know who's at my party. I can't wait. Like, I mean, honestly, I'm like, oh my God, how much lacto? Like, who's in there? I want to know about the biofilms. I really do.
Right.
Because it really is a constant moving target. It's so strong and yet so fragile, right? Like you said, the fabric of your underwear can change the pH. Having sex can change the pH. Then introduce a new partner. Oh my God.
Right.
And there's bacteria in semen.
There's actually more bacteria than sperm in semen, famously.
What?
Yep.
You're full of good news.
I got lots of vaginal health facts.
We're going to start a whole segment that's like, the good news. Wink, wink, with Priyanka Jain.
I can't wait.
Okay, more bacteria than sperm.
Yeah. And so there's so many different triggers for this. And I think what's so unfortunate is that because of the taboos, because of the stigma, we don't talk about it. We don't realize that it is so common and that it is happening to us throughout our lives. Like we have patients from 18 to 85, truly. We have patients in nursing homes. Another fun fact is that nursing homes are one of the leading places that STIs spread.
Yeah.
And so there's huge need for actually accessible, easy testing for both STIs and vaginal health.
Right.
And so I just think that it's one of those topics that permeates our lives through our whole lives, but somehow we've never talked about.
Yeah.
And honestly, I'm grateful that Evvy is growing up in the age of TikTok, where like, frankly, it is the only platform where we can kind of laugh about things that are maybe kind of gross, but like we've all kind of been there together and destigmatize it.
Yeah.
And Evvy has well over 200,000 followers across all of these platforms. It's just amazing. On vaginal health education and destigmatizing these topics that nobody's really talked about before.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. It's so important to talk about them. That's the whole point of this show.
Completely.
Is just to talk about it. I feel like the seeds of shame proliferate in silence. Yes. And therefore, just start talking. Completely. But what I love even more, or a yes and, is the fact that we can actually learn about the different party guests and who's in there, because that's what we don't learn about when we go to the doctor and we just get the antibiotic and we take it. We don't really know what's going on. We don't know about that biofilm. And when we do understand it, like you said, talk to women like they're smart.
Right.
When you understand it, then you can actually go in and ask for what you need because you have a sense of what's going on.
Completely.
Because our bodies are talking to us all the time. They are telling us, they send us signals, and we can actually become a lot more sensitive to those signals when basically we kind of get our brain and our body on the same page.
Exactly. And saying, oh, interesting, when I have this symptom, my microbiome's actually fine, and this is actually just a cyclical part of my month. Whereas this other symptom, that's when I know now that there is someone present and I need to deal with it.
Exactly.
And it's like, we just have only been trained to think like itchy, yeast infection, monostat, right? Yep. And there's actually so much more nuance to it that by giving women the data, they can then actually orient how they're feeling and understand what they need to do next.
Right. Otherwise, you're just on the internet and you're like, I don't know which one it is. And then you're throwing a bunch of stuff at it, which might be exacerbating the problem.
Completely.
Oh my gosh.
And this is let alone all the ways that it affects the rest of our health, right? And so it's like, there's both, you know, the many, many millions of women who suffer from recurrent vaginal discomfort and symptoms. And then there's the rest of, there's everyone else with a vagina who it is playing this really important role in our health, but we've just never looked at it before. Yeah. And so I think, you know, we have to, in my opinion, earn the right to be a preventative health tool that, like, I would love for one day every person with a vagina to be looking at their vaginal microbiome, paying attention to it the way we do our sleep and our nutrition and everything else.
Oh my God, so true. Like, look at us looking at nutrition labels and wearing devices for sleeping and for our heart and everything else. It is so important. And coming back to that statistic of 30%, right? Yeah. 30% of all of our visits are something's going on down here.
Totally. Well, 30% of people with a vagina at any moment have a vagina in dysbiosis.
Okay, but then the leading cause.
Yes, the number
one.
Okay,
there we go. Okay, all right.
Yes.
Thank you for clarifying that. All right, so 30% of people with a vagina are having some kind of infection.
Yep.
At all times.
Yep.
Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like I have to laugh at it a little bit because 1/3 is a lot.
Right.
It's really a lot.
And there's it just happening to so many people at all times.
Yeah.
And we're not thinking about the fact that it's playing a role in fertility and pregnancy and cervical cancer progression and all of these things. And it's time, in my opinion, for us to gather the data, to do the research, to get finally medical school to teach doctors about so many things in women's health. I could go off about this forever too.
Oh, I could too. Yeah.
It's crazy. And it's, you know, the number one type of OBGYN visit. And of my friends who just graduated from residency, they told me less than half a day was spent on anything related to vaginal infections, even though it will be the number one appointment type they have in their careers.
Less than half a day?
And the words vaginal microbiome are not spoken.
No.
So we have a ways to go. And I think it's fair. You know what? We have to do the research. We have to get people on board.
Right.
We have to show it works, all of that. And that is what we are doing. Yeah. But I think that I always want to speak to the women to say, you know, but you are also not crazy. Just because your doctor hasn't been taught it yet, the research hasn't been done at scale yet, that doesn't mean that the way you feel is invalidated. And I hope that the Evvy experience at least gives people the data to say, okay, we might not know everything yet, but I know this isn't in my head. And 30% of other women who have the same symptoms as me, also we don't know what's going on. But we know that there's something here. Right. And I think that there's so much that comes from community and information and peer support. And for something that's so common and that affects our physical, mental, emotional health, relational health, it's crazy to me that there hasn't been data before.
Yeah, it really is. All right, so would you say that Evvy is like kind of the leading now hub for this data?
We have the world's largest and most comprehensive data set that has ever existed on the vaginal microbiome, which is very exciting. We've discovered double the number of genomes than had ever been documented on the vaginal microbiome before Evvy. Yeah. And so now we're really excited. We're partnering with a variety of different academic institutions, clinical practices to say, okay, we have this treasure trove now. Let's start making this useful. Let's start really understanding how we can change clinical practices, how we can understand how the mechanisms of action for the ways that the vaginal microbiome affects all these health outcomes.
Sure.
So that's what we're on the journey of doing now.
And are you searching for other communities besides the people who come to you and say, yes, I'm going to pay this money and I'm going to get this? And yes, I agree. Use my party guests for your... for your scientific findings, however you will. If I do that, right, that's part of that data set.
Yep.
But then are you searching for more, like let's say from other doctors' offices, from whatever, just so you can have more, so then we know more faster?
Yeah, totally. We do partner with many, many, many doctors, hundreds of doctors in the U.S. who use the Evvy test to help their patients. So doctors who are also frustrated. They're like, I don't want to give.
Okay, good. That was basically my question. Yeah.
And unfortunately, you know, payers don't really care about vaginitis. And this is a problem we've been facing since day one, which is, insurance companies, essentially, the people who pay the bills. And so, you know, I would love for Evvy to be covered by insurance. I would love nothing more. Yeah. But even the PCR tests that are so much simpler than Evvy, they have a hard time being covered by insurance. Wow. And so I think we have to do a lot of the research. We have to prove that we are not only improving vaginitis outcomes, which to a payer or to an insurance company is not that big of a problem. We have to show that we can improve outcomes in, you know, in preterm birth, in cervical, in areas where they have dollars for us to get to that point. And I think we will get there, but until then, people have to pay for Evvy until we can get there.
But that makes perfect sense because it can't be But that is the goal.
Yes.
The goal is that it would be covered by insurance.
Of course.
And unfortunately, you do have to get to that point, which justifies it for them, which I understand.
Right.
What's your estimate on how long?
What a great question.
If you had to guess, I'm not going to hold you to it.
Yeah, I would guess 2 years.
That's good.
I mean, I'm obviously an optimistic and ambitious person.
I like that. It's not 20.
Right. No.
I don't think it'll be 20 either.
No. We have so much data. We have so many great collaborators doing so much research. I think the vaginal microbiome is such an important biometric marker for anyone with a vagina. And I think we are hopefully going to bring that to light faster than it's been done before. I always say we don't have to do research in 2024 like it's 1993 when we first started studying women. We can do it faster, better, cheaper, all of that by just putting the patient at the center, giving her the information she needs, treating her like she's smart, providing her with valuable services, and then that's how you earn the right to do the research much faster. We don't have to wait for the government to give money to, an academic institution to enroll patients over 5 years, to analyze the data over 2 years. We can do it differently.
Okay. You mentioned, people who were like every 3 months, right?
Yeah.
We're going to check back. Are there also people who do it once they get it figured out? They don't need to do it again?
Yeah, great question. So definitely people can buy the test one-off, totally up to the patient. I think the reality is that your vaginal microbiome is not a stagnant community, right? So of course our goal is to get people better, but then a lot of things happen. You might change birth control. You might have a new partner. You might have a long period. You might have sat in your swimsuit for too long, right? Your vaginal microbiome, in an amazing way, is, responding with you to your behaviors, your treatments, all of those things. And so it's not really a one and done situation. Vaginal health is something we have to kind of pay attention to and be proactive about. And so that's our hope, is that we can help people be proactive so that we avoid the massive flare-ups.
Absolutely. All right, so let's go to that. Let's go back to that question.
Yes.
When the doctor does their test, now you mentioned that 4-point.
Yep.
But what's different about what they do versus what you do?
Yeah. So, most of the time a doctor is not even doing an actual DNA test on the sample. Most of the time it's the 4-point test that I mentioned earlier.
And that's just looking at the shapes.
Under the microscope.
Going like, that looks like staph? Question mark?
Well, what you're looking for is does it look rod-shaped, which means it's likely to be a lactobacilli? Yeah. Does it look like it has clue cells, which means maybe it's a pathogen?
But that's maybe.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, there's a lot of studies showing that it's a very unreliable metric because across doctors, they read them very differently.
Whereas if we do the test that you do, which is, what do you call that test?
Metagenomic sequencing.
Okay, so if you do that, that actually comes back and it's this.
Right. It's like you're actually looking for all of the microbes.
You're IDing that person. It's not like, maybe it's this.
And it's not looking for 1 to 3 to 5 things. It's saying, regardless of what's there, tell me what it is and how much of it is there. Instead of saying, is one of these 3 things there, yes or no? So think about a COVID test, right? It's a PCR test saying, is this specific virus present or not?
Right.
But that's not actually helpful when you're trying to look at a microbiome and trying to understand the overall community. And so the tests that doctors have access to today are either the microscope or a PCR test, and we are trying to introduce the sequencing aspect of really looking at everything.
You get that swab in.
Yep.
So I'm assuming, is that swab like in a little baggie or in a little vial?
It's like a little, and then you put it in a vial, same as COVID test. We've all done that.
Same as COVID. Yeah. All right, so we know what we're talking about. Stick it in a vial, stick it in the mail. Okay, it now comes to your lab. It's got my name on it.
Yep.
What happens?
Great. So the lab, it goes through a sequencing process, which is a journey.
Okay.
There is the extraction of the DNA. There is prepping the DNA to go on the sequencer. Then there's the actual, many, many hour sequencing process in which the machine looks at all bacteria and fungi that are in that sample. Then what happens is you get a many gigabyte file of A's, C's, T's, and G's. And then the next step is saying, how do we actually correctly identify what microbes this DNA belongs to? Okay. And so that's where our database is so helpful, because we're able to say, actually, we know that there are actually 5 species of Gardnerella. There's not just one. And because we have that level of specificity, we've discovered all of these genomes, we can start to annotate that massive gigabyte file with much higher fidelity and precision than we've ever done before. And so the next step is then matching the genetic data to the microbes. And then that comes back from our lab. We partner with a CLIA/CAP certified lab that does all of the actual wet lab and dry lab work. And then we take all of the microbial information about what was found.
Yeah.
And our system then combines that with everything you told us. These are our symptoms. These are the diagnoses I have. This is what's going on with me. And that's how we generate the personalized experience for the patient, saying, since you told us this and because we found this, this is how those come together.
Got it. Okay. All right. So the metagenomic sequencing,
Yep.
that is you said that takes hours.
Yes.
So first you have to extract it, then you have to stick it in the machine, then it does hours of work.
Like 48 hours.
48 hours.
Yeah. We partner with the CLIA-CAP certified lab. They were a lab
Okay.
that already existed. They developed this test for Evvy.
Oh, gotcha.
And we basically brought this type of sequencing to this type of sample in that lab. But they are experts in running a lab, running a clinical lab, has a lab director that signs off on all of the results.
Yeah.
It's physician ordered, physician reviewed. They do all of the wet lab work, and then we do the data work. We take that data, we combine it with your data, and we contextualize it for you.
And my data includes it's itchy, it's like, right? Like
Exactly.
that kind of a deal?
And helping you
Okay.
understand, oh, interesting, these microbes are associated with these types of symptoms.
Yeah.
And these ones are actually associated with something totally different. Or if this is your health goal, then these, if you're trying to get pregnant, these are the ones that have been associated with positive or negative pregnancy outcomes.
Okay. Okay. And how long does your process take?
It's all automated. We love technology.
So that's the AI part.
Yeah. So we basically...
Love it.
Their process takes about 7 to 10 days
Yeah.
to get through that whole set of things.
Yeah.
And then they send that back to us, and we are able to immediately send them to patients.
And did you create the technology that you do?
Yes.
Okay.
Our team built that. We have a team of certified health coaches that reviews every result to make sure that we've contextualized all of the information. There's always a human involved.
Yeah.
They send it out to the patients. Patients are then able to meet with the health coaches one-on-one and then decide
Right.
if they want to see their own doctor or see a provider through Evvy.
Okay, really interesting. So clearly what the doctor does
Very different.
and what you do. So now I'm like, wow, 100, you said 100 or 130?
Dollars, yes.
Dollars?
Yes.
Okay, so that seems well worth it. Because
We would like to
that's
say so.
intense. That's intense. Like if it's going through like genomic sequencing
Yeah.
in a certified lab and then it's coming to you and then it's putting it together with I've had this many UTIs, etc. Or taking somebody's history or somebody's goals, whatever it is,
Yeah.
and then going, okay, here's what it is, and then I get the coach too.
Yep.
That seems very well priced, might I just say?
Thank you.
I mean, it
We worked
really,
really-
does. To me, if you described all of that and said, guess how much that costs, I'd say $500 to $1,000.
Wow. Well, I appreciate you saying that. We hope that we create more value than we charge. And I remember when I started Evvy and I was like so frustrated that people have been using such bad technology in vaginal health. There was PCR testing. There's another type of sequencing that only looks at one variable region of the genome, which is like the vast majority of vaginal microbiome research has only used that technology. And you're missing so much of the nuance. You're missing so much of the important information. And I was like demanding. I was like, we must find a way to get whole genome sequencing. Like there has to be a way. And everyone was like, it's going to cost you $500 a sample. It's not going to work. It's never going to be possible. And we are really grateful for our lab team, all the people we partnered with to say like there has to be a way to make this possible and affordable. Like computing costs have gone down, sequencing costs have gone down. Like let's figure it out.
Let's make it work.
Right. And that's why I think we've been able to discover all these genomes. This is why we're going to be able to push the research forward because finally people are using good technology in women's health.
Oh my God. Your parents must be so proud. They really must. I mean, that's quite a feat. It really is. I have newfound respect for what you've done, what you've accomplished. I've read about it, read about Evvy. This sounds amazing. I'm absolutely going to do the test for sure. But actually to know that you are absolutely, without question, closing the gender gap in healthcare.
Thank you. We are really trying our best. I think it is an uphill battle in every possible way, but the patients and the amazing, amazing community around Evvy of patients who finally say, I thought I was alone in this, or I finally figured out what was going on, or I feel better for the first time in my life. Like that is good motivation to push.
Can you help people that have like endometriosis and those things that are typically so difficult to diagnose / treat?
Yeah, I mean, we are not experts, no, in all of those conditions, endometriosis, PCOS. I have many amazing friends who are working on many amazing companies that I can definitely refer to. One of them is called Alara. They do hormonal health conditions like PCOS and endometriosis. There's an amazing set of companies in the menopause space that we were talking about earlier. I'm so grateful and excited to be alive at this time in many ways. I think from a political standpoint, it is slightly depressing to be in women's health today. I think at the same time, there is so much innovation. There are so many amazing people who are taking this up as their issue. And I think, unfortunately, the funding could be better. At a global level, I think 1% of healthcare R&D goes to women's health. And on a venture level, so private funding, I think only 3% of digital health dollars went to women's health. But those dollars are hard at work. There is so much.
True.
I mean, those founders work harder than anyone you've ever met.
And you've got those dollars. You got it. Right?
Yes.
You're part of that 3%.
Yes.
You made it happen.
Well, that is very kind of you. We are really lucky. I think we've raised $20 million in the past 2 years, and we have an incredible team of investors and supporters.
Great.
We have one token male investor, we always joke. But it helps to have women on the other side, right? Don't have to explain what is yeast infection, what is BV, does anyone care? And so I think having women in the funding roles is just as important.
Yeah, incredible. Really incredible. Well, I know that you're also like a UN ambassador for girls. It would tell me, like, I know you have these other things that you do, which is basically makes so much sense because I think you should be inspiring other young women who could be heading towards this field. What are those things that you do?
That is so sweet of you. I'm less involved today. It turns out being a CEO of a startup is pretty time consuming. But I was very involved in an amazing organization through the UN Foundation called Girl Up. And the focus is basically, it's a by girls, for girls campaign focused on health, education, documentation, literacy, leadership, all of these things for the hardest to reach girls in the world.
Yeah.
And it has been the most amazing campaign, both obviously for the incredible girls who we are able to provide with the most basic but fundamental services, but then also to watch the girls who are helping build the campaign, right? The high school girls who find a voice, who decide that they care about something, that they can stand up in front of their peers. And so that has been an incredible campaign to watch grow. Millions of girls a part of it now, which is amazing. And I think that, all of the work being done on the nonprofit side just will be better as we figure out more on the technology side. I think that they must go together, and as we invent cheaper sequencing and generative AI and all of these things, we have to remember that there are ways to use those technologies to actually improve people's lives.
Most definitely. It feels like it's where you are is the tip of the iceberg, and getting to that though was very, very difficult to get to, and now there's so much more to be explored.
Yes.
But just to get there is really massive. Thank you so much for taking the time, because I do know how busy I have an inkling of how busy you are, and so now I'm like, go back to the lab, Priyanka. Go back to work. go raise more money. All the things that you do as a CEO, as a founder, are huge.
Well, it goes right back at you. I think nothing that we do matters if we can't reach people, and that if there aren't, we always say, thank God there are platforms today that are willing to say the word vagina. I have been in TV interviews where right before I go on, they're like, please avoid saying the word vagina. And I'm like, wait, you can't ask me to be on this show if I can't say the word vagina.
I've had a similar experience. As you can imagine.
Right.
Yeah.
And so anyways, I really admire so much the platform that you're building. And I think we are only as good as we are able to reach people. So what you're doing is such an important piece of the puzzle.